All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our MPART PFAS Town Hall in Oakland County International Airport and Pontiac Lake State Recreation Area. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. My name is Jim Wojciechowski, and I'll be helping moderate today's session. Just want to go over a few housekeeping logistical issues before I turn it over to Abigail. So first thing is that all lines are muted. Means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. We are also recording this session, and we'll be posting it up on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. So if you're looking for it, that's where you can find it. When it's time for questions, you can ask a question a couple different ways. If you want, you can use the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar to type a question in, and we'll get to those questions after the presentation. We'll read them off and have our panelists answer. You can also click the raise hand icon. And if you do that, it lets us know that you have a question and we will unmute you. So we'll give you the ability to unmute yourself then so you can ask your question. If we have people on the phone, doesn't look like we would do now, but if we do, you just hit #2 and you can raise your hand that way. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Abigail Hendershot, who is the Executive Director of MPART. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight, talking with us. As Jim said, please feel free to stick questions in the chat box as we go through, or the question and answer box as we go through, because you know, you may think of something and it'll take us a little bit of time to go through these this presentation, and we don't want you to forget your questions. So as Jim said, I am Abigail Hendershot, the Executive Director for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. Happy to be with you tonight. We're actually going to talk about two sites. They're side by side. One is the Oakland County International Airport. The other is a crash site at the Pontiac Lake State Recreation Area. And we will go through and show you maps of both of those so you get an idea of where they're at. So tonight, we're going to go through a basic overview of MPART. What is it? How does it function? Bill Farrell, our toxicologist for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, is going to talk to you about PFAS and health, some of the big questions that you might have. Kevin Wojciechowski is going to go through the specifics of the investigation area, both for the airport as well as for the recreation area, and walk you through some maps and stuff. I should note that this entire presentation is being recorded, and we'll get you, we'll have a copy of the PDF slides out there so that you don't have to take a lot of notes. We can get those to you as well. And then I'll come back after Kevin's done, and we'll walk through the MPART website just so you know where that this site's going to be posted, and you can find additional information as we go on through the investigation. Then we'll come back at the end. Jim and I will go through the questions and answers, and we'll make sure we've got a full panel of people here today to help answer questions, so we can do that as well. All right, so let's talk about MPART. MPART stands for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. It was a created as an executive order in 2019 by Governor Whitmer, and it's really a very unique multi-agency approach. It takes 7 different state agencies across Michigan, and we coordinate and have a broad basis of discussions and meetings constantly to talk about the state's implementation for PFAS. It really requires a coordinated approach, and this has been very strategic and very, you know, has really helped Michigan to come out into the forefront of the nation for PFAS action response. And so it's one of the reasons that we've been able to really move and be so quick to respond to some of these issues that we're facing. So, but what's PFAS, right? PFAS are, it's a group of family of compounds, so per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, stands for the whole family of compounds. They're a family of compounds that have very strong carbon-fluorine bonds. They're usually some sort of a surfactant, very, very highly stable. We use them for water and oil and fat and grease resistance. on a whole wide variety of products. They started being developed in the late 1940s. Today, we know we have at least 5,000. I think that number is actually higher than that, but they're in a lot of commercial products. But what's the issue with them, really? The big thing is that they are very widespread in our ecosystem already, and they don't biodegrade. They're very hard to get rid of, hard to break down, and they can bioaccumulate in our bodies. So we can build up PFAS in our bodies over time. We know that there's some potential, there are health effects from PFAS, depending on the specific compound and how many carbons it's got on it. And then there are how many fluorines it's got on it. And then there's a lot of science that's underway and emerging information, but we still don't have any federal standards at the national level to help direct a unified PFAS approach across our nation. So let's talk about uses. A lot of these you're going to say, oh, I didn't know that. PFAS in carpet, yes. Your carpet has been Scotch guarded, stain resistant. You've got carpet cleaning products that are going to have surfactants in them. Food packaging that is going to have some traces, so your pizza box doesn't have, the grease doesn't leak through the pizza box. You've got that nice little white coated liner. Your couch, you probably were offered to have it Scotch guarded before it came home. That's going to be a PFAS compound. We're learning that cosmetics have PFAS, that a lot of the outdoor gear, which of course is waterproofed, the clothing, adhesive and sealants, any of your waterproofing materials for your shoes, our nonstick cookware, the Teflon cookware, a lot of it had PFAS. There are coming up with some alternatives, but it's still potentially in that PFAS family. Car seats, again, being Scotch guarded, and then the firefighting foam, which is one we're going to talk about here specifically for the Oakland County Airport, as well as the Pontiac Lake State Recreation Area, both had what we call AFFF, which is an aqueous form filming foam, which is an acronym for PFAS firefighting foam. And those are certain types of those foams have PFAS. And in the case of firefighting foam for jets or for airplanes, it's going to have the PFAS. So let's talk a little bit more about PFAS in the cycle, and the way I talked about previously, how PFAS gets into our environment. It's very hard to get out, but it also cycles through our environment. So if we start over here on the left with a PFAS producing industry, they may use it for, maybe they make fabric and they've got Scotch guarding that they do to the fabric, or a protective treatment. Maybe, they do some sort of cleaning in their products and they discharge PFAS either to the wastewater treatment plant. They may have unknown, releases to the groundwater, or they may directly discharge to a surface water body. All of those are potential ways that PFAS are going to get into the environment. In the case of the wastewater treatment plant, it'll go through the sanitary sewer, but we don't have, most of the wastewater treatment plants are not designed to filter out PFAS. And so then it could go directly through the wastewater treatment plant back into a river. It could get into biosolids. It could be discharged as sludge to a landfill. There's many different ways. And so this is kind of the complexity of PFAS, is we have a lot of different routes and not many ways to kind of stop the cycle. One of the other things we're going to talk about is this one down here with firefighting foam. Again, all of these different routes have ways to get into our groundwater and potentially into our rivers, which, if you go all the way over to the right, is a source of drinking water for many, many of our residents in our state. And this is very important that we protect our drinking water for consumption for residential homes. So all of these things put together are the reason that Michigan is taking such an aggressive stance in understanding, identifying, and investigating PFAS sites across the state. So we do have standards. We're one of the few states in the country that actually have PFAS standards. These standards are both our drinking water what we call maximum contaminant levels, MCLs, for drinking water for our municipal supplies, as well as our groundwater cleanup standards for protection of groundwater for drinking water in our aquifers. And so PFOA at 8 parts per trillion, PFOS at 16 parts per trillion. We've got 7 different compounds here that are part of our standards, and they are legally enforceable criteria. So one of the other things that Michigan has done besides set actual cleanup criteria for drinking water is to do a lot of sampling for lakes and streams. Kevin's going to talk about some of that information that we have for this area as well. That involves doing fish sampling. We've done foam sampling, surface water sampling, co-located samples. There's quite a wide variety of information at this point for surface water and fish data. So when you look at this map, this will actually make the since we're adding 2 sites, we're now up to 184 PFAS sites, MPART sites across the state. And so this looks like a lot of sites for Michigan, and it's really more that Michigan is actually looking. We're actually taking a methodical, diligent look across our entire state to understand where do we have groundwater contamination that exceeds those standards. Then those are the sites that become MPART sites. So at this point, we have 184 known PFAS sites that are being investigated, for protection of drinking water, understanding the other multiple pathways for contamination of our surface water and soils, etc. So many of these sites that you see here are going to include our military sites, our industrial sites, our plating, finishing sites, our landfills, our tanneries. We have a number of industries that seem to discharge high levels of PFAS. Go on to the next one. One of the final things I want to just mention about MPART is that we again have an MPART structure that is not only collaborative from the state side for across the different departments, but also we've made it a point to be collaborative with our citizens. And so the Citizens Advisory Work Group is actually a part of MPART. We have once a month meetings with citizens who have been affected by PFAS across the state. We talk with them about engaging our communities, empowering our communities, and how to make sure that our residents get education and get information that is transparent for their information on making best decisions for their homes. So this is one I'll circle to back when we get done and show you how you could potentially join our Citizens Advisory Work Group as well. Let me hand it over to Bill Farrell of Department of Health and Human Services, who can talk to you about PFAS and health. Bill?
Thanks, Abby. My name is Bill Farrell. I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I also manage our agency's PFAS site operations response group. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of public health, both the state and local health departments at these PFAS sites. Then I'll talk about what our current understanding of the toxicology of these particular PFAS chemicals. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate residential well sample results. So as you may be aware, MPART is made up of a collection of state agencies. And when we investigate these PFAS sites, the project team consists of both state and local agencies. In particular, it consists of EGLE, which is the lead investigatory agency. And then you have both the state and local health departments. Now, the state and local health department's role is to provide the public health support. We work to understand the health concerns facing your community. We develop a plan to investigate and address the health risks. As I mentioned, EGLE leads the investigation portion of that assessment, and then MDHHS, the state health department, and the local health department lead the public health planning and response. The health departments evaluate PFAS exposures to residents in the community, and then we recommend public health actions as needed. Next slide, please. So how can you be exposed to PFAS? As Abby mentioned, PFAS historically has been used in all kinds of different consumer products as well as industrial products. So all of us, just throughout the course of our daily life activities, have been exposed to PFAS. So the most significant exposure you get from PFAS is ingesting PFAS. And in particular at these PFAS sites, the primary concern is, in terms of exposure, is drinking water that's contaminated with PFAS chemicals. Also, as Abby mentioned, PFAS bioaccumulate in not only humans, but also biota. So the Michigan Health Department have what we call our Eat Safe Fish Consumption Advisories. And basically PFAS, like a lot of other chemicals, can accumulate in fish. So the state does routine sampling of fish across the state, and then they analyze those fish for different chemicals, including PFAS chemicals. And then based on the concentrations of those specific chemicals, particular chemicals, the state health department each issues fish consumption advisories. And also incidental swallowing of contaminated soil or dust is another way of being exposed to PFAS. Eating food, packaged and materials containing PFAS. Use of some consumer products results in exposure to PFAS. And then, as I mentioned, typically ingestion of PFAS is the most significant route of exposure. PFAS absorption through the skin is typically not a concern because the exposure is much less relative to ingestion of materials or products that contain PFAS. Next slide, please. So all of us have been exposed to PFAS throughout the years. And as a result, all of us have some level of PFAS in our blood. The way that PFAS bioaccumulate in humans is that when we are exposed to PFAS and then we take these chemicals into our body, they are segregated in the blood. They basically bind to proteins in the blood. So this graph shows the results of studies of the levels of PFAS in blood in the population in the United States over time. Basically, this study has been being done as part of a larger study. It's called the Nutrition and Health Examination Survey Study, which is being done by CDC. And basically, this is an ongoing study that's been going on for years. And basically what the study does is they look at the nutritional habits of people in the United States. And also as part of this study, they also collect samples of blood from people in the United States, and they measure the levels of certain chemicals that are known to bioaccumulate. And in 2000, they started measuring certain PFAS chemicals in blood samples collected from people in the United States. And what I want you to pay attention here on this graph is, if you look at the upper line, the green line, you see this is the average concentration of one particular PFAS, PFOS, beginning in 2000 and then through 2014. And as you can see, in 2000, the average concentration of PFOS in the blood of people in the United States was about 30 micrograms per liter. And then you go to 2014 and you see that the average concentration is about 6 micrograms per liter. Now, the reason for that is that in 2002, the United States stopped the manufacture and use of two specific PFAS, PFOS and PFOA, in products that were manufactured in the United States. So as a result of stopping the production and use of those two particular PFAS in the United States and products in the United States, we've seen you see a decrease in exposure to those two particular PFAS, and consequently we see a decrease in the average concentration of those two particular PFAS in people's blood over time. So next slide, please. So what do we know about the potential health effects associated with exposure to PFAS? The associated human health outcomes associated with exposure to two particular PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, include reduced fertility, high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, small decreases in infant birth weight, higher cholesterol, especially total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol. Next slide, please. Thyroid disease, liver damage, decreased immune system response to vaccines, developing certain types of cancer, in particular kidney and testicular cancers. And these cancers are only associated with exposure to PFOA. And one thing I want you to keep in mind when we talk about exposure to PFAS and potential health outcomes is that it's a risk. So in other words, if you're exposed to high levels of PFAS, you could be more likely than the average person to develop some type of health effect in the future. So it's not an absolute, it's a risk. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we, when we investigate these sites, we collect drinking water samples from people's wells, and the health departments are responsible for evaluating those results and making public health recommendations. So this slide shows some of the multiple lines of consideration that we look at when we're evaluating residential drinking water well results and determining the need for public health response actions. Some of the things we look at are MDHHS comparison values, the residential well results, both individually and collectively, and then any site-specific information we know about the known source, the geology, direction of groundwater flow in the area. And then the next few slides, we'll talk about each of these individually a bit. So what are our MDHHS comparison values? Our comparison values are the lowest of the MDHHS public health drinking water screening level or the EMPART health-based maximum contaminant level, which Abby showed in a previous slide. So both the MDHHS screening levels and the MCLs were set to protect everyone, including the most sensitive populations, including those that are most at risk of harm to their health, fetuses and breastfed babies, okay? Next slide. So these are the MDHHS comparison values. So with the exception of PFOS, our comparison values are the MCLs. And then for PFOS, we have a comparison value of 8 part per trillion. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we look at the residential well results both individually and collectively. And here I want to show, I'm showing two different scenarios. And what I want you to do is pay attention to the house in yellow under both scenarios. So on the left, we see a house that let's say we have some low-level detections below our comparison values. And then the homes around it are all non-detect. Okay, so that's one scenario. And then the second scenario is we have that same home, they have the same results, low-level detection below the comparison value, but the homes around it, we see detections. And for the most part, we see detections above the comparison value. For that particular home in yellow, under those, because of the conditions or the different conditions under those two different scenarios, we would most likely have a different response action because of those different conditions. So for example, the home on the left, we may just do some follow-up monitoring, as opposed to in the scenario on the right, we most likely would maybe recommend a filter or some type of alternative water to give us more time to do more investigation to understand what's going on long-term. So again, the same result in both in the home, but the different conditions surrounding it dictate different response actions. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned the geology, the hydrogeology. This slide kind of gives you an idea of some of the reasons why, for example, we may sample an area and a home may have a detection, and then their neighbor may be non-detect, and people often ask, well, why is that? Well, if you look at that figure up under the geology heading, you'll see that you have 3 different residential wells, but you see that the screen or the portion of the well which is drawing the water from the aquifer is at a different depth. So the 2 wells to the left are screened in where we have that red color, and that would be the PFAS plume. So they would essentially be pulling water away from out of the plume, whereas the home on the far right is screened below the plume, so they may be non-detect. So again, that's kind of gives you a view of the conditions vertically, but also horizontally. You see the the figure on the far right under the plume, you can see when we're talking about not only PFAS, but other chemicals, when they're migrating in groundwater, they distribute both horizontally and vertically. And as a result of that, it's not unusual to sample homes right next to each other and see, as I said, one home where you have detections and other homes where you have non-detect. So the geology, the hydrogeology also plays in a role in how we respond to when we do our evaluating residential well results. Next slide, please. So in terms of our public health response actions, depending on the conditions, we may decide that there's no need for public health actions, or we could recommend alternative water. And typically what we do in terms of why we're recommending alternative water, it's because we need time to conduct further investigation. We need to understand what the exposures are long-term. So the filter provides the residents with a level of protection from potential fluctuations in PFAS levels while the investigation is ongoing. And then in other situations, we may just provide educational materials in terms of our public health response actions. And then this last slide shows, this is the Eat Safe Fish guidelines for the Pontiac Lake. And as you can see, the chemicals that are driving the consumption guidelines are PCBs. And at this time, there's no consumption, Eat Safe Fish consumption guidelines that are being driven by PFOS in surface waters near the airport site. But this slide shows you the Eat Safe Fish, where you can go to get information on guidelines. And basically you go to this website, and if you're interested in a particular surface water body, the guidelines are segregated according to county, and then you go to that particular county, and then you can see if that lake is listed under that county and what the specific guidelines are. If the lake is not listed under that particular county, your surface water body that you're interested in, there's no listing, then what you would do is to follow the statewide fish consumption guidelines. So again, all of that information is in the website. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Kevin.
Thanks, Bill. So I'm going to talk about, well, actually, first, my name is Kevin Wojciechowski, and I am the Eagles lead project manager for this site, or these sites. I work out of the Warren District Office for the Remediation Redevelopment Division. And like you've heard from Abby and Bill, we work as a team. Even though I'm the lead, I have a lot of people I'm working with and gathering this information. Next slide, please. So this is an overview showing the area of where the airport and the state rec area is located. And as you can see, the airport to the east, state rec area to the west. And then I will also be discussing the residential well sampling that has occurred around the airport. All right, next slide. So I'm going to start with the airport. So the airport has received what's called an MDOT grant to do investigations of their PFAS or AFFF releases. So the airport has started to conduct groundwater and stormwater investigation on their property. So based on we got some historical information from the airport that the airport first got AFFF in 1965. They got their first truck. But unfortunately from 1965 to 1996, they lost, there's no records of the use, where they used it, how much they used. So those records were lost. We don't know what happened in those years. But between 96 and 2000, AFFF was utilized mostly on incidents, crashes, and they had one accidental release. And then based on where these incidents occurred from 1996 to present, their consultant installed these monitoring wells to sample for PFAS in the groundwater, the shallow groundwater, which is approximately about 12 feet below the ground surface. And out of the 8 monitoring wells, they're able to get samples. 6 of them had exceedances of what you saw of one of those PFAS compounds that Michigan has criteria for. It tended the higher concentrations were over on the western or on the eastern side, MW 9, 8, 4, 5, and 6. MW 1 and 3 were, I believe, non-detect, and then we had some minor detections in MW 2. So a little bit higher detections on the eastern portion of the airport. Next slide, please. So as part of the investigation and installing these monitoring wells, the airport's consultant was able to get what's called a groundwater contour map put together, and this shows the flow of this shallow groundwater that's approximately 12 feet below the surface. So the groundwater flows from the north side of the airport south, and then on the eastern side, it's got more of a southeasterly component to it. So south to southeast, and keep that in mind when we talk about the res well sampling. Next slide, please. So this is the recent stormwater results that we got from the airport. They sampled at 2. So ST1 is water coming flowing onto the airport property from Williams Lake. It gets put into a pipe, goes underneath the airport property, connects to a larger pipe where the ST2 sample was collected. And I believe that flows then to the east down Highland Road or M59. So they've collected some samples. They did get some detections of PFOS above our water quality criteria, both in the dry weather. They do a dry weather sampling event, and they do a wet weather sampling event. And this first round, they did have exceedances. And what's interesting with this is the water coming on had detection. So we need to further look into that to see what's going on, why the water that seems to be coming onto the airport property already contains some PFAS compounds. Next slide, please. So as part of the investigation, it actually running parallel to the airport's investigation, Eagle, with their state contractor, started working with the health departments in identifying residential wells around the airport in close proximity to the airport to do some sampling. And we did 2 rounds. We did a round, I believe, of about 11 homes, and then the second round was 16 homes. And what you're seeing here is the dots. The gray dots or the black dots are homes that have wells or businesses that we attempted to sample that either didn't want to be sampled or we were unable to get a hold of anybody. The yellow dots you're looking at is some detections of PFAS compounds in the drinking water well, but no exceedances of any of the criteria for the compounds we got criteria for. The red dots are exceedances, residential wells that exceed 1 or more of the criteria for the PFAS compounds. And then we have the lone drinking green dot, drinking water well up there just north of Williams Lake that had no detections of PFAS. And then, and then as you see, we've only got 1 sample to the south, the 1 red dot south of M59 or Highland Road. That's a landscape business. At this point, that's the only sample we have to the south, and then we have no residential well samples currently to the east or west. But what's real interesting about this is, if you remember, the groundwater flow, the shallow groundwater flow was to the south and southeast. Now, the red dot to the south of M59 was the highest well we've seen as far as concentration, so that makes some sense. But what's not really making sense right now is concentrations actually increasing in the residential wells as we get further from the airport. So, we're continuing to look into expanding this area. I'm working with the health department to expand the search area a mile north, a mile south, half mile east and west from the edges of the airport. We still haven't decided how many of those wells we will sample, but we will be sampling more wells in the coming future. And then these residents, most of them, or not all of them, have been contacted and working with the health department and DHHS on water filters for the interim response right now. Next slide, please. So as part of getting information from the airport and their consultants and doing some research online, we found in 2014 was an air freight Cessna 310 twin engine crashed where you see the cluster of soil borings. Just made it to land, crash landed. The airport responded offsite and used approximately 80 to 90 gallons of AFFF to put out the fire. But Eagle led this investigation because it occurred off the airport property. And what we found was in elevated levels of PFAS in the groundwater at the crash site in 2 of the borings. And then we found low levels in all the other borings. SB9, there was no groundwater collected, but the remaining borings all had similar PFAS compounds to the airport. And like I said, the crash site right near the lake had the highest levels in the groundwater. We also sampled soil in the crash area. We don't have any criteria for soil, but we collected it for possible future, if there is a possible future remediation or something that goes on out here. We do have some soil data that was collected. And Eagle has tried now to engage the liable Royal Air, the owners of the crashed aircraft, engage them on their responsibilities. And I've not currently heard back, but we've sent them a letter and tried to start engaging with them. Next slide, please. So this wasn't done because of the airport. This actually investigation of the Clinton River watershed was done because of a bass that came back high with PFOS levels out of Cass Lake. So as part of that, the water, I think Eagle started investigating the Clinton River watershed. But as you see on this, this 9.4, the highest reading, which is coming out of a little small lake to the north that is, closer to the airport than these other samples. So, we're gathering all this data and trying to figure out, all the possible exposures and different ways where this can be traveling. So this is data that wasn't collected specifically for the airport, but it's near it, and it's going to be, more information that will help us in this investigation. Next slide. So the public drinking water that is in the area that Waterford and White Lake get their groundwater from the ground, from wells, and the Waterford Township was sampled in November 2000 and February 2001, and there was low-level detections of PFAS detected. You see 3.5 and 4, with the criteria being 51. And they will continue to be annually sampled moving forward. And then also, so White Lake was also sampled November and in April, and they were non-detect, but they will continue to conduct annual sampling moving forward. So these are the 2 public drinking water systems that are nearby to the airport and the state rec area. And I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Kevin. All right, let me take you very quickly to the MPART website, just so you can take a quick look. This is the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team website. And when you come into the website, you'll see this as the main page. We've got a bunch of tiles up here that will help you, but we also have our popular pages. Your PFAS sites are right here in the middle. And we've got, for this particular one, we can put in Oakland and,
Hey, Abby,
yep,
we're not seeing your screen.
oh,
I'm trying to share it.
hold on, okay. Let's see. How do I do this? Probably got to get out of this then. All right,
Still
you're
seeing your
still
slide.
seeing this part of it. There we go. Okay, now are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, let me just pull up what you are seeing. So I can't see what you're seeing. All right, tell me when you can see this with the, or do I have to reshare?
You probably have to reshare because we're still seeing your slide.
Screen 2, there we go. Share. There we go. How about that?
I got it now. Yep.
Okay. So let's go back to the beginning real quick. Here is our PFAS Action Response Team webpage. In the middle, we have, you can take it and navigate from the top or from the popular pages in the middle. PFAS sites are actually here, and we will have the names of them all down on the side. Now that there's 184, you may want to use the search. And I believe that Oakland County, so will be up. I think this one's going to be up tomorrow, actually, because for whatever reason, it's not filtering it today. But your sites will be up here, and then we will, they basically have a the site and then a map to go with it that will usually show up there. So when we go back to the other thing I wanted to show you real quickly was if you're interested in the Citizens Advisory Work Group, we do have that page up. And there are not only all of our meetings, we've got the calendar for all of the next meeting will be on Tuesday, the 12th. Everybody's welcome. It's open to the public. You don't have to make any reservations for that. And then back one, if you want to become a member or just see what it's all about, everybody's welcome. But all of those presentations and meetings are videotaped, so you can go back and check them out and see. And I think a ton of information. If you haven't already checked this out, the MPART website is a great place to get some additional information. So I'm going to leave it there and go back to the presentation. Can you see the PowerPoint, Jim?
Yes.
Or do I need to reshare?
You can see it. It's just in your editing mode.
Okay, that's all right. I think that's good enough for today. How about we go to questions and answers then? How does that look?
Abby, we don't have any questions right now. So just to remind people that are with us tonight, if you do have a question, you can type it into the question box on your Zoom toolbar and we'll get to it that way. Also, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon and we can see it there. So let us know. And Abby, just let you know, the web pages for the two sites are up. I sent out in the chat. If you guys take a look at the chat, I put direct links. It might just be your cache on your browser needs to clear. So
sometimes that is an issue for my particular machine is it needs to be restarted to get those sites to come up when they're posted during the day like that. So, and I will just mention to everyone, we do have a number of our team on here. We've got local public health. So we have Oakland County Health Department with us. We've got some of our water resource staff as well as Kevin available. So if there's any particular questions, feel free to throw it in the questions and answers, or if you, like Jim said, want to raise your hand, we're happy to take any questions. So we can see what people have. Any questions that we see?
Still no questions.
Okay.
I'd drag it out and see if somebody would ask a question, but nobody with their hand raised. Oh, got one just came in, so good to see that. All right, so the question is, has there been any human health studies for the substitutes for PFAS compounds such as Gen X?
It's a great question. I'm gonna let Bill take that one.
Yeah, there are substitute PFAS that are being developed and used, and there are toxicity studies being done to understand the toxicity of those particular chemicals. As far as any comprehensive health studies, at this point, I don't know. When I use the term health study, I use it in terms of like what we're doing here at DHHS. We're doing a health study in the North Kent County and Parchment area, where we are collecting blood samples from people, water samples from people who have been exposed to PFAS in their drinking water. And as part of that, we're also doing a health study to get information from residents in terms of their health history in that. So that particular type of health study is being done now. But again, this is primarily exposure to the first generation of PFAS chemicals like PFOS and PFOA. To my understanding, we haven't seen too much in terms of Gen X and PFAS sites across the state. So.
Thanks, Bill. Anybody else have a question? I want to remind you that in the chat box, I was typing in and putting in a bunch of different links as our presenters were going through tonight. So if you want to check those out in the chat, you can.
Jim, also, I don't know if you did like our contact information for the panel in case maybe people want to give us a call tomorrow or something. So.
Yep, I did put your contact info in
Okay.
there, so people can see that. Okay, a couple more questions just came in. Any idea of likely sources for the widespread range of PFAS concentrations in the Pontiac Lake area? Kevin, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So we've been, I've been looking into possible other sources. I've gotten calls into Waterford Township Fire. They have fire station number 4 up on north of Williams Lake Road, north of kind of that area, the residential area we're looking at. I did recently, Water Division found a story from a gas station on North Williams Lake Road, north of the airport, where a guy was removing a UST and exploded, but it doesn't say if foam was used or if anything was used to put it out. I know the gentleman passed away, but it didn't say in the article if they used anything. We do have, I do manage a landfill, there, the Waterford Hills landfill, which is northwest of the airport, and actually northwest of that only non-detect residential well. You want to, yeah, it's off the map, but it's to the north. It's northwest of the green dot is the Waterford Hills landfill. We're monitoring that for PFAS. We don't see it in the monitoring wells. We do see it in the leachate, but the leachate is treated and pumped to sanitary sewer that goes off to the Great Lakes Water Authority treatment down in Detroit. So right now, everything's kind of coming to a dead end. We would like to start seeing an investigation and in the deeper part of the aquifer where the residents are drinking down in that 60 foot or deeper. It seems like a lot of the residential wells are 80 foot or deeper, but they vary. That slide Bill showed was very good, showing that each one of these residential wells that has a dot is a little different depth and can vary 50 to 100 foot in depth of these wells. So that's another factor. So we're looking at no real smoking guns right now. The data in the residential wells, PFAS compound wise, is similar to what the airport is, but the groundwater flow is not matching up right now. At least the shallow is not matching up what we're seeing in the deeper aquifer. I know Pontiac Lake itself they are scheduled to do some like fish. I think 2022, they're going to be doing some fish sampling and fillet sampling to see if there's anything, impacting that lake. And I know there's a lot of fishing that goes on. I fished that lake myself. And we're hoping to get, more investigation done by the airline that crashed. We don't think that's a major source just because of the location in the right next to the lake. We think a lot of that is discharging, where the crash is discharging back into the lake. And that's another thing that, we're talking about is doing some more surface water sampling in this area to try to maybe see if that can kind of lead us to, if there is another source. We're using that a lot in Michigan, sampling watersheds as kind of finding where to find, these maybe possibly discharges into these watersheds. So unfortunately right now, we got a lot of data, but it's not pointing in any one direction of what's causing of this at this time.
Kevin, it would be safe to say though, that if residents have any information of foam use or of any other kind of emergency response that might have occurred in the last, 30, 40 years, to give you a call and just share that information with you.
Yeah, that's very good, Abby. Yeah, for sure. Anybody got anything? I've done Google searches and trying to find articles of large tanker fires, but that, has come up pretty empty. So if anybody that's lived in the area for a long time remembers something, happening, especially up along Williams Lake Road and north of there, because we have data that's showing, impact to those residential wells to the north. And we will have to look further south too, but right now we have the most data to the north. So yeah, anybody's got, we'll take any information we can get, and we don't think there was any former plating companies in the area, but if somebody knew of a little plating shop that was around at one time that we don't know about, that's helpful too.
Yeah, I think, we'll be pretty, I think Kevin's team will be pretty exhaustive in this search to understand the concentrations and the distribution, because at least at this preliminary stage, it leaves us a little puzzled.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Another question, you touched on this when you're going through your answer before. What's the average depth of the residential wells that were sampled?
I would say the average depth, 100 feet. Okay. A good average. You got stuff below that, and you got stuff as shallow. I think it's off the top of my head, 60 feet down to 120, 140. So I would say the average is 100.
All right. Not sure if I quite understand this next question. Maybe you guys will. When did BEAs begin sampling for PFAS constituents? Is that baseline environmental?
Not till recently. I mean,
yeah, it was.
Yeah, not until after 2018 would they have started to more routinely consider PFAS as a constituent for a baseline environmental assessment. So those are done for property transactions and try to document the baseline conditions of a property during a transaction. And so I would think, at least in the Grand Rapids office, we didn't start seeing PFAS until probably 2018, 2019. Kevin, what do you think in your area?
Yeah, about the same time, kind of when there was some kind of number when we first had that 70 number, because I think nobody really looked for it too, because there was no criteria to compare it to. So yeah, I would say right around that time when we got that combined number 70 for PFOS and PFOA.
Mm-hmm. Good question though.
I am not seeing any more questions, nor do I see any hands raised.
Okay.
So
Well,
if you want to
this
take it over,
will-
Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, this will be video, this is recorded, and we'll post it to the MPART site page for the Oakland County Airport, as well as the Pontiac State Game Recreation Area. If anybody's got questions or thoughts on other potential sources or contributing sources for PFAS, please contact Kevin. But appreciate everyone coming out tonight and being a part of the conversation. And we will look to keep everyone informed as we go forward. So I think that's probably all for tonight. Thank you so much.